friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
And after a long but not super long hiatus, we have returned because the people demanded it. They deserve the best. And even though we can't necessarily give it to them, we're certainly going to give it the old college try and give them something that may be slightly better than mediocre. Welcome to the Watching Comics Podcast.
Welcome. You know, the people do deserve the best. They demand the best. And they get us. You draw your own conclusions.
God bless the internet. Before we jump into the real reason why we're here, I do think it's important to shout out and tell our wonderful internet fans and followers, listeners, and celebrity fans as well. You know, the people that we know that are listening that have great clout in the Hollywood industry. They deserve to know that, Jake, you are in the thick of fatherhood and themed birthday parties, which is super exciting. A chapter that I never thought you would see.
Yeah. Here I am. I am days away from throwing a fourth birthday party that is Minecraft themed. And I'm taking a couple of days off work to, the thing is, there is a great excuse built into this, right? To take some vacation time. So I scheduled that and I'm having a couple of days off to spend with the kids. And yeah, it's crazy, man. When I stop and ponder it, I get a bit overwhelmed with like, oh, holy crap, I've been in charge of another human for 4 years.
And those other humans are still alive. Yeah,
that's the crazy thing.
But in true Geek Dad moniker status, throwing a Minecraft birthday party is, I think, geek-tastic enough to both still be like really cool, but also leaning into the geekiness just a little bit. I think you're staying on brand is really what I'm getting at.
And that's really what I'm all about, is my brand, you know?
That's why we're playing in this vast game called the internet, man. It's wild. Got to stay on brand. Got to have a consistent message. And darn it, your kid deserves that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the cool thing is even though we're fathers and we have our own places to live and we're grown men with jobs and everything like that, the geekery doesn't have to stay silenced. And that's ultimately why we're here at the intersection of grown men that still love to not necessarily pretend we're grown men and dive back into the comic book world, both on the screens and on the pages. And that's just kind of what this podcast is all about. Hence us being a member of the Geek Dad Podcast Network. It's pretty great. But Jake, you were easily one of the most like, I don't know if street cred is the right term for when we're talking about these sort of things, but like,
that's not a phrase a lot of people attribute to me.
But in terms of comic book knowledge and feedback and just overall opinions, I feel like you're one of the more well-read options out there for the people to listen to. So that's why it's important that we bring to them important, what should I say, maybe definitive opinions on special things like Daredevil season 3, right? I mean, am I stroking your ego too much?
No, I mean, you know me. There's no such thing as too much there. So, if you'd like to continue to wax poetic about my non-existent qualifications, then yeah, I'm happy to sit here for that. I got time. I'm on vacation, man.
I will let you.
I actually, it's interesting that you bring up being read on page, because I want to do a quick callback to a few weeks ago. We did Shut Up and Give It to Me Volume 2, and I have actually now caught up on both of your recommendations.
Oh, snap. Look at you getting after the homework, man.
Well, and late, I wish but I guess it would defeat the point of Shut Up and Give It to Me if we knew one another's picks ahead of time.
Right.
But I read the first Trade of Faith and I read Snagglepuss, and both excellent picks. So if you're looking, and the nice thing about Mitch's recommendations, guys, is that they're always diverse enough that they're going to hit all tastes. So if you are looking for something more traditional superhero-y, hit Faith. If you are looking to get outside the box, if you maybe are not normally a comic book reader, I recommended Snagglepuss to my wife, who enjoyed it. So Get at that, guys. It's so good. Track those things down. I really just felt like I had to do that callback tonight and say that, Mitch did not lead me astray. And to me, a recommendation of any kind of book, comic or otherwise, is like one of the most sacred bonds between people. So, Mitch has upheld his end of the bargain here and made a good one. So go out there and get those things. Read them. They're good.
Yeah, I will go ahead and be accepting my star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame as well. Those two things. I'm super stoked to hear that you gave your wife a copy of Exit Stage Left and that she enjoyed it. That's like the ultimate Inception level, like, achievement, right? Because we basically started this podcast because she was like, hey, if you could find someone else to talk about this stuff with, that would be ideal. So the fact that she's kind of on board now with the title that we've discussed at length, I feel like the victory is ours, is how they say that on the streets these days.
Yeah, I think that's what the kids are saying.
The kids are definitely dropping those hashtaggers on the Snap Insta Twit books.
I just had this mental image of somebody like Snapchatting or Instagramming, like they hit a really good 3-pointer and they're like, victory's ours.
Right. With the Steph Curry hands raised, walking away with his back to the basket before the shot comes in because he knows it's going in. It's like classic GIF material.
There are former clients of mine through work that have threatened to listen to this podcast, and if they are listening, I promise you right now, they're like they probably just turned it off.
They've threatened to listen to it. Like,
I don't know. I mean, yeah, they're like, oh, I'm going to get out. I'm going to get done here, and I'm going to listen to this thing. Like, oh, okay, all right.
You better watch it, Jake. You're making me so angry that I'm just going to go listen to that thing that you put out there for people to find.
So, if you're listening, you know who you are.
That's right. You're welcome. That's the only shout out you're going to get, nameless person.
I cannot legally say your names, but it's good to have you.
So now that we're here and we've done the housekeeping at the top of the episode, Jake, we are here to talk about Daredevil season 3 for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like the people deserve to know how we feel about it a couple weeks after it's been live. Mm-hmm. Two, I don't know, because it's flippin' awesome.
Oh, because it's so good. And after, Luke Cage, I enjoyed. I'm not trying to trash Luke Cage, but there were parts of that season 2 of Luke Cage that were kind of a slog to get through. They felt like work. And this prepping for this show is normally not work for me. And Daredevil season 3 has just been a real solid return to form. It's been so nice. And I feel like, man, it is just like reminded me of how good these Netflix projects can be when everything's firing on all cylinders.
Mm-hmm. That's the thesis statement for this episode for sure, right there. How good it could be. This is it. This is like the nice, cozy, warm blanket with a cup of hot cider because this is the perfect fall time activity. But we're going to be covering the first 6 episodes of this season here in this episode. The episode after this will cover the rest of the season. But I'm going to say this 6 episodes deep. With your shout out to Luke Cage, Jake, I am still waiting for Matt Murdock to run the NFL draft combine training. I'm ready for that. I'm waiting. Gotta be coming, I'm ready. Right? I mean, the only thing more impressive than watching a massive specimen the likes of Luke Cage doing something that we know he would have already been awesome at is watching a blind person do it. So I don't know. I just felt like we were going to be given that, and it's not here yet, and I'm starting to get worried. We only have so many episodes left.
He's going to go try out for, like, what is it? Ninja Warrior, like Ultimate Ninja Warrior or whatever. And that's going to be his thing. Warrior. Yeah, American Ninja Warrior. And then, like, Jessica Jones season 3, she's going to be an Instagram creator.
So what if that was a thing? What if, holy crap. Okay, so I've seen like maybe 2 whole episodes of American Ninja Warrior in my life, so I know enough just to be dangerous, right? I translation, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I know enough to say like, hey, I know what this thing is. How cool would it be if that was real life? Like, I don't want to see an episode of that because that would probably be campy, but if a blind vigilante really was on American Ninja Warrior and like broke the internet with his awesomeness, how cool would that be?
I mean, I'm kind of just waiting for it now.
Again, we're here. We're waiting. The idea's out there. Someone, please. we're ready to marvel at you and to snap, Insta, Twit, Facebook, all the fun viral stuff that goes with that. Okay.
Oh man.
So Jake, we don't have much time because, we can't let these episodes go on for hours. So give me like a 2-sentence or less review or initial thoughts on the first 6 episodes of Daredevil season 3.
2 sentences or less. As often as you summarize things like that, I should really start getting ready to come with short reviews.
Like if you can't tell listeners, our production meeting before this episode was very brief.
Well, because we kind of knew what we were doing for a while. I would say my short summary is that it's really, really good and one of the best Daredevil stories in any medium that I've seen in a while.
Mic drop, man.
Yeah,
that's actually pretty high praise considering you came in cold with that. So well done.
Well, thank you.
You may now you can now hold on to your street cred. You do not have to relinquish it.
Man, and I do not have a lot of it to go around, so it is good.
It is sparse. I need every little bit I can get. Yeah. So, okay. Am I understanding correctly that you felt like Daredevil before season 3 was already the best single installment of the Defenders run on Netflix?
I actually think before season 3, I felt like Jessica Jones was the best, with Daredevil in a really close second. And it depends on the day you caught me. I might have switched them up. So don't hear me super committed to that. But
waffler.
Yeah, a little bit. But I mean, I think the thing for me is that season 2 of Daredevil is just a little bit, I don't want to say it's bad or weaker. I do think that it was not quite as good as season 1 of Daredevil, whereas I felt that Jessica Jones, with her first 2 seasons, kept a sort of forward trajectory that Daredevil didn't. Is that like
okay?
And
I'm pleasantly surprised by your answer because I thought you were going to go with Daredevil all the way, and I've had Jessica Jones at the top of my list, so I thought we were gonna like have to go back and forth a little bit on that. But I'm glad you've seen the light. But I just think Jessica Jones season 1 and season 2 is all killer, no filler, and they just really have captured the noir flavor in such a impeccable way, and we've covered that in previous episodes. But season 2. I think weaker may be an adequate word for season 2 of Daredevil. And just because you're saying it's weaker doesn't mean you're saying that it's weak. What happens is Daredevil season 1 was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, probably like a 9.2. And Daredevil season 2 was probably like a solid 8, mainly because it was a lot of Punisher. And you and I have both unpacked the fact that the Punisher is just pretty one note. And I think they squeezed as much out of that as they possibly could. But holy friggin' nutso, Batman. Daredevil season 3 has blown off the gates and they have come out swinging, and it's not very often you can tell where a project is trying as hard as it is, but it doesn't feel forced. It comes across as brilliant. Do you think that would be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that'd be very fair. I think that, I'm trying to kind of summarize all of it, and not go too far into it. I think that season 2 just, and I'll even say that the Punisher was one of the stronger parts of season 2, much as I do not love that character. I do think that it was really well handled in season 2 of Daredevil. My biggest issue was mostly that, as I've said with the Defenders, I think that the Hand is not a compelling villain or story. And they've had their runs in comics that are interesting, but this is, for me, the thing with characters like Daredevil is that I really enjoy what we tend to call the street level characters of the Marvel Universe. Spider-Man, Daredevil, and that's not to say that I don't love some Doctor Strange here and there. I love some of and the cosmic Marvel is amazing, but my favorites have always been the characters that tend to deal with more everyday crime. The characters that have to fight.
You're an everyman kind of guy. This is a common theme that I have discovered throughout our recorded discussions, and there's nothing wrong with that. You dig the everyman, and I think Daredevil and Spider-Man are probably Marvel's best representations of those, as far as just the most humanistically qualified to say we could represent an archetype that touches most people.
Yeah, and so I say all that to say I think that when stories like Daredevil get away from the ground level stuff and they start dealing with the supernatural ninja stuff, it's not that it's bad, it's just not as compelling to me as the true crime element, or not true crime, but that kind of crime flavored element with the Kingpin. So season 3 to me is a return to what I truly love about Daredevil.
All right. So here's kind of what I want to cover, Jake, since we didn't really talk about it before we hopped on. So here we go.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one big takeaway that you think is especially stellar. I want to talk about the 10-minute one-cut fight scene in the prison from episode 4.
Yes.
And I want to talk about the timeline and the setting of this season. All right. So you pick. Which one do we want to cover first?
Can we just talk about that super awesome fight scene in the prison first?
Yeah, can we just, like, when that friggin' thing happened, I had to scoop up my brains off the floor and put it back into my head while I was closing my drooling mouth because it was open for the 10 solid minutes. It was like the most mind-melting action sequence I've ever seen on television. Like, they had announced this on Comic-Con. The showrunners had gone to a convention and had said not long before the launch of this season that they were confident that they had topped the corridor fight scene that you and I had talked about the last episode we were on from season 1, which we both loved. And I was interested to see what that was going to be. But man, it was, from a purely cinematic standpoint, that was probably the biggest flex they could absolutely do in any sort of action-themed television show. We could literally spend an entire podcast episode just talking about the ramifications and challenges behind doing something of that magnitude in that single scene, and on top of the fact that it was impeccably well done and a visceral experience that was filled with adrenaline at the same time. You extrapolate that one thing and you could like teach that in a film class and basically say like, okay, here is one way to do one of the hardest things you could ever possibly do in a high quality action experience. So like, take this and study it.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to go to, and I'm glad you brought it up, the corridor fight scene, the prison fight scene. What do you think is the better fight scene?
Okay, so, oh man, that's such a difficult question to ask, and I know that you worded it that way specifically because it's kind of a trap. Like, I think choreography wise, maybe the corridor scene might be sharper. Maybe it's a blend of the fact that it's because it was more of a contained area. It was a quicker bit of film. It was brand new at the time. We had never really seen something much like that before. And it was just kind of that blend of like, holy crap, they really choreographed this thing and it was masterful. But Jude, the prison scene is just a flex. Like, it is straight up a steroid laced mood, but I don't mean that in a campy sense. Like, it's not a Sylvester Stallone, Kurt Russell in Tango and Cash flex. It's like the French Connection, masterful, like we're reinventing what it means to do something for this type of filmmaking, and especially on the small screen kind of flex, while still being incredibly entertaining. 10 minutes and 43 seconds is what I think it clocks in as. And it is just on the verge of being too exhausting, but it doesn't go too far. I don't know. Do I even answer the question? Is there a right answer to that question?
No. And I think I agree with you. I think that the choreography in the corridor scene is just a smidge better. What I really love about the prison fight is there's this very visceral, physical, like there's weight to it. Does that make sense? Like when they hit one another, there's this weight to it. There's this feeling, man, just this feeling of force behind it. And I also think that the prison scene does something that many action scenes fail to do, and it contributes to the story, and it serves the story that's being told. And I feel like in that scene, we get such a clear and visceral look at Matt's mental state. And we get such a good, it's so reflective of where he's at emotionally and mentally. And it's this very brutal beating that he's taking. And it feels like it fits so well with the story. And it just makes it goes from a 99% to a 100 because it flows so well with what's happening there. It's such good storytelling. And in a vacuum, just that fight scene, it would have been awesome. It could have been in whatever movie came out, and we'd have all gone and seen it and said, holy cow, that's a great action movie. But because it's in this season 3 of Daredevil, and it's so influenced by what it is, and it's such a big part of the story, it fits so well, and it magnifies the greatness of it so much for me. And I love this scene so much in a way that I rarely find myself raving about action scenes these days. It's so good. And I hope so many filmmakers will take a note from it, because it shows us, the way that we've seen in the last few years that horror can be more than just kind of throwaway. It can be interesting and fascinating and a vehicle for storytelling. We've seen in the past that action films can be that too. And I hope some film student is watching this show and taking away from it that there can be some great storytelling with action films again.
I think you hit maybe the heart of the whole issue. Is technically speaking, that scene in a vacuum still would have been worth writing about and worth raving about, because it really is a technical feat of masterful proportions. But the point that you hit, I think, is the tipping point, which is it's indicative of the greater thing that goes on through Daredevil. Like if we say there is not a single decision that they're making with this season, and we could even say the whole show, the whole run, these 3 seasons, there's nothing that these showrunners are putting into it that isn't serving a bigger purpose beyond just the entertainment value, which I think takes it to a deeper level. And I couldn't help but think of True Detective season 1. Have you seen True Detective season 1, Jake?
Oh yeah, season 1 I saw.
Okay, yeah. So I think I've mentioned this before. It's towards the top of the list of the best single seasons of television I've ever seen in my life. And I rewatched it just a couple of months ago for the first time in a while. I was actually introducing my mother-in-law to it because my mother-in-law deserves to watch good television, and I'm a good son-in-law. So we were watching it when she was visiting, and there's a sequence that's very similar to that. It's in like episode 4 or 5 where they're doing the drug raid. And it's literally an action chase sequence through a whole drug neighborhood with helicopters and guns and everything like that.
I remember that scene, yeah.
That's completely uncut. And when that came out, it was groundbreaking. And it still stands as one of the single best scenes of 21st century television ever produced from a technical standpoint. And it fed into the overall tone of the show really well. But what I found really interesting is that is the biggest filmmaking flex of that season, and they did it on a bird walk, like a side story. It was all in an effort to get this small piece that was extra, that was contributing to something else that was eventually going to lead to something bigger. It wasn't hinting at the heart of the actual narrative. It was the only time we were visiting that world in that season. It was the only time those characters were dealing with something like that, and they were trying to circumvent the normal route to get to something. It was a side piece that just had this amazing moment that was kind of a capstone moment of the whole season. Whereas this prison fight scene for Matt Murdock, like you talked about, it is a window into the true characterization of the true north of this show. It is indicative of where he is at as a character and as a human being. It is indicative of where the show is going. It is indicative of the deeper, more profound messages while we're getting something that visceral and that bloody and that actual at the same time. And so to see something that magnanimous from a technical side and still be able to carry the kind of weight that it needs to for characterization and say that that could arguably be one of the big tipping points of characterization just for Matt Murdock himself, I feel like is just, I don't know if you can overstate how difficult that is and also how brilliant of an achievement that is.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a good show, but man, that scene really captures so much of what's great about it.
Sweet. Okay. So I'm glad that we can nerd out about that. I was pretty sure you wanted to hit that. I'm like, how could we not talk about that? Man, that's so good. Okay. So give me, how about this? What do you think about this? I was fascinated to see that they kicked off season 3 basically like 5 minutes after Defenders is done, which if it was a standalone would make complete sense, but we never could really fully answer these questions that we asked ourselves about Jessica Jones season 2 and Luke Cage season 2, which was, where is this in relation to the Defenders? And so I found that really interesting. What's your take on that?
I think that it makes sense because they went the Elektra route with the Defenders. That there was going to have to be some discussion of the fallout in this show. Whereas, Jessica Jones and Luke Cage could maybe to a certain extent ignore it. But I thought, Iron Fist and Daredevil were so intertwined with the mythology that went into Defenders, you were going to have to see those shows at least address it. It makes me wonder, It makes me wonder, how much, and this goes back to our last episode where we talked a little bit about the whole Netflix thing. It makes me wonder how much this connected universe still lives and, how much they want to be acknowledging the other shows, how much they want to be intertwining things.
I'm glad you brought that up because I felt like this was I initially wasn't going to want to talk about that because we kind of covered that in the previous episode, but I don't know how you gloss over the fact that Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are clearly just ignoring the Defenders. And that's an intentional choice, but Defenders but Daredevil leans into that for the reasons that you've stated. It's fascinating to the bigger puzzle because Luke Cage, Iron Fist are canceled. Jessica Jones is going to get one more season. It's just really interesting that we're kind of interconnected, but we're kind of not. And I don't know if there's a word for that.
I think the word is DCEU. I'm right. I mean, it's got that feeling of a universe that started to come together and then maybe for whatever reason it didn't hit all the notes they wanted. And so they're going to keep part of it going and not part of it. I don't know. I think that, excuse me. I think that there's definitely a lot of strength to that shared universe. And I think that we saw, for example, Luke Cage and Iron Fist seem to become a little bit bigger than the sum of their parts when they were allowed to explore the screen together. What's interesting about Daredevil being the one that is really running with this as much as it is and following that aftermath is that I felt Daredevil of the shows probably least needed to be connected to the other universes. I mean, Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are sort of intertwined, at least for comic fans. Danny Rand and Luke Cage are intertwined for comic fans. So there's a pre-existing reason to bring those together, but Daredevil, he's kind of a little bit an island unto himself where I felt he least needed that. And then as far as the quality of the show, I don't think any of us were like, boy, Daredevil's pretty good. But if they would just really build on some of the narrative stuff going on in the Defenders, I think it could be better. And so I don't know. I find it interesting, but I'm also not, what I also find interesting is how much they are, but aren't building on it, right? Because while the show is clearly entirely informed by how broken down Matt Murdock is after the Defenders, it's really not going a whole lot that I've seen so far anyway, 6 episodes into, oh man, without Elektra, what is Matt? It's not doing any of that. It's not necessarily referencing specific things other than like a building dropped on him. It's more exploring his state of mind at rock bottom, and how we got to rock bottom doesn't seem to be quite as important as it felt at first.
So would you say that linking to the Defenders, does it enhance or take away from what you're seeing with Daredevil?
Can I go middle road and just say I don't know that it's affecting it? Like, I guess I get the feeling that if they hadn't had Defenders to work with, because the storyline that they're drawing from to inspire the bulk of this season is Born Again, which is a very dark Daredevil story, and they're not doing a one-for-one recreation, but they're being very informed by it. And I get the feeling that they were headed this way, and that if Defenders had not ended the way it did, they still would have found a way to break Matt Murdock down to rock bottom, to explore that end of the character anyway. And I feel like they just thought it was elegant to take the ending of Defenders and set it up that way. And maybe they saved themselves an episode or half an episode of setup where they, now we don't have to watch Matt's life fall apart. We've already seen it.
Which is I think it's super great from a narrative standpoint, because the last thing we need is another Netflix series where the first 2 episodes or 3 episodes are so slow they're kind of throwaways.
Yeah, and that was very wise to jump right into the good stuff.
Yep. Rock on. Okay, so it's just a very fascinating thing. DCEU may be the most astute thing you said on this episode, just from the standpoint of like, I'm not sure we're going to get a definitive answer, and that may be the closest thing we have to compare it to, which is just, okay, some things work with the connected, some things didn't, or some things ended, and you know what, just it is what it is, so just enjoy the good.
Yeah, and that, because it feels like they're starting to, again, man, I don't want to get too far into this because I know we've already hit it, but it feels like we're starting to pull this universe apart a little bit again and let it all stand on its own again.
Rock on. So, Jake, give me your one big takeaway from the first 6 episodes of something inherently positive. Give me the thing that you loved the most, or the thing that surprised you the most, or what's your big influential takeaway from the first half of the season?
I think that the first half of this season is so far answering for me a question, and a good question. I don't mean any of this derogatorily. It's answering a question that I had in season 1, and that is, whose story is this really? And I mean that in a good way, because some of the best stories end up not being about who you think. And Charlie Cox is phenomenal. I want to take nothing away from him. And I feel like we always forget to praise him in the rush to praise everyone around him. So Charlie Cox, fantastic job, loving it, really carrying this thing. But he is unfortunate enough, or fortunate enough, probably more fortunate, to stand next to Vincent D'Onofrio. And
the throne that we bow before.
Oh, it's so good. And him in the white suit haunting Matt Murdock is so perfect. And he looks like the Kingpin from the comics. Like, I sat there with my wife watching. I was like, oh, just put on an ascot. Just put on a purple ascot. But man, you really could make the argument, and again, this is a compliment, you could make the argument that Daredevil is the name of the show, but it's about Wilson Fisk, and that this is all truly the story of how Wilson Fisk breaks bad in a final and permanent way, and how he goes from being behind the scenes Kingpin of crime to embracing the identity of Kingpin and becoming that person. And this could ultimately be just his origin story.
I was going to say that I felt something very similar, where I was, as we're inching along through the season, I'm wanting to, we'll see where it ends up, but I'm wanting to throw it into the basket that I have Breaking Bad and House of Cards in the concept of like these 2 really great landmark shows that were driven by one really well-defined character, but when you look at the whole, you can make the argument, and I subscribe to the theories that both of those shows were actually by and driven by the narrative of other characters instead. Like, I think Breaking Bad is like, yeah, it's a Walter White story, but I think it's a completely different podcast for another time, but like you could definitely take Jesse Pinkman and say that he is the center of that show. Like 100% that like
there's there with you.
Yeah. And same thing with House of Cards. Like, I was actually going back and forth on Instagram with one of my internet buddies, Steven Carter. If you're listening, shout out, buddy, about House of Cards. And even before the whole Kevin Spacey debacle, and he rightfully got fired from the show because he was apparently a disgusting pig. But even before then, I was by about middle of season 2, I was subscribing to the theory that, like, okay, Frank Underwood is at the center of everything, but Claire is the one that's actually pulling the long con. And this is a show about her puppeteering a man who thinks he's in power. And I think it's not necessarily discrediting those two shows. It's saying that that's a huge reason why those shows, at least in their primes, stand head and shoulders above so many others that are trying to get there. It is because of that layered approach and incredible writing and characterization that goes beyond just the person that's looking into the camera. And Daredevil definitely seamlessly fits into that. So Charlie Cox definitely deserves a Real Men of Genius commercial dedicated to him because he's phenomenal. But there's a reason why this season is getting back to good and why it's getting Mount Rushmore level. And it's because it's not just a Charlie Cox show, and it's not because his performance is weak, but it's because there's enough narrative real estate from the canon of Daredevil and a perfect casting pairing of D'Onofrio there that there is no reason why the show shouldn't be a back and forth between the two, who are both clearly Herculeanly talented enough to carry it and make it happen.
Yeah, and it's Daredevil and Kingpin is such a legendary comics relationship, and to see it brought to life by actors this talented who make one another better is really just a real joy. Like, it's just there are times, this is why even though I'm not necessarily a fan of theirs, I enjoy watching the Golden State Warriors, because there is something to be said for watching people who are great at something just do it at a high level. And I say that to say, watching Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio play off of one another, even when they're not sharing scenes. And that's what's incredible, is the way that the performances are informing one another, and they're not even all the time on screen together, or even really that much so far in the season, but they are so much informed by one another, and they're so much playing off of one another's energy and momentum. And it really becomes something really special. And I could watch this season, I could watch those first 6 episodes over again right now and be as thrilled as the first time. Already I want to rewatch them because it's just so good, these performances. I also find it fascinating, and I've been reflecting on this, and this is nothing but just reflecting on the narrative. This is no crazy insight, but how interesting is it that, like, 3 seasons in, Daredevil is still struggling with the very basics of who he is and what he's about, whereas Wilson Fisk has just embraced it so fully and become this guy.
And I think that is actually probably where the narrative eats. Like, that's the thick of the meat right there. It's that concept of like, okay, what does it look like to believe that people can change and evolve and to be constantly searching? And what does it look like to subscribe to the worldview of, okay, everything is inevitable. You are what you were made. You are either what you were born as or what you were made to be. So lean into it and be the best at it as you possibly can. And that's age old narrative right there. And that's another reason why it's a strong story. Superficially, can I just say that I'm glad that the black suit, or lack thereof, the black suit is back, because if I have any complaints about Daredevil at all, it's that in the comics, Daredevil, in my opinion, is one of the most well-suited superheroes. Like, he just looks so darn sleek in that dark red. But the show's actual like red costume is just a little bit lacking. Seems just a touch hokey for me. And so I actually prefer the black approach with the makeshift headband over the eyes. Like that's the kind of Daredevil I want to see when in the concept of just this show.
Well, and I also like, it comes back to me to him oscillating between the two, to what we were just talking about. It comes back to that idea that Matt Murdock is very much still a work in progress, and that, you called it classic narrative, and you're exactly right that villains are not necessarily villains because they do bad things, although that's certainly a big factor. Villains are villains because they are static and they believe they have become who they should become and they are done evolving. And heroes are heroic because they continue to struggle and evolve like the rest of us. And watching Matt oscillate between the two and go from the red suit to the black and take, what could have been a literal step backwards and instead turn it into an exploration of the character, it's just even more showing the depth of this show and the way that this is one of those things that is elevating the comic book genre and the whole world around it, whether it's comics, films, TV shows based on comics, whatever. It's taking that whole comic universe and elevating it, or maybe just realizing it, and realizing its potential and showing what it can be. I really, really am with you. I love the black suit. Aesthetically, I'm also with you. I thought that the red suit, there's something about, like, Batman pulled it off somehow, but usually I don't love when visual medium take classic superhero costumes and turn them into like battle armor, and it's like we're going to use riot gear and just decorate it like a devil, and that kind of thing. For me, like, it works. I'm not totally taken out of it by the red Daredevil costume, but I'm with you. Yeah, the black suit, there's an elegance to it.
Yeah, the red suit just looks like they went so far practical that it was too much. Like, it was it's too practical. They could scale it. I don't know if I could word it accurately, but you were much closer to it than what I was. But yeah, just it looks a little bit too much like, he's going to go to a kickboxing tournament.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Or gearing up to play some football. Okay, so in the last couple minutes here, we haven't talked about him yet, and we should probably. Give me like a quick little soundbite on Bullseye.
I think that Bullseye is regarded as one of the premier Daredevil villains, and I'm going to have an unpopular take with my people here, which is the comic people, and I'm going to say that
Coming
that's
in hot, smoking
I'm going to
hot.
say that's more an indictment of the lack of depth in Daredevil's rogues gallery than it is a praise of Bullseye as a character, because Bullseye as a character, there's just not a ton to him, and I think we're all acting like he's cooler than he is because he killed Elektra. There, I said it. And like, I hear the people down the street at the comic book store that I like to go to, like, oh, what is he? They don't listen to this. I've been trying to get them to. But
yet those are the people that are going to listen to it when you really piss them off. So yeah, maybe right. Give them your Bullseye take, and they'll be like, well, that idiot, I'll show him. I'm going to listen to a stupid podcast.
The honest truth is, I talk a big game. 9 times out of 10, I do not have the stones to speak up at the comic book shop and disagree with people, just because I'm always like, do I have 3 hours to spare? No? Okay. I'm just going to walk away from this discussion about who drew the best Wolverine.
I've seen Big Bang Theory. It doesn't end well, and your life doesn't have a laugh track to soften the blow.
All that being said about my unpopular take on Bullseye, and that's not that I hate him. I just think he's overrated. I think that he's
Twitter bots will come after.
Well, I think that this season 3 is actually making him properly rated. I think that this origin for Bullseye adds just enough tragedy, but it's still creepy tragedy, where we didn't need another truly sympathetic villain, and he's not that. I'd say it's more like the Purple Man. It's more like Kilgrave's tragedy, where it's like, oh man, things were kind of rough for him. Still a creep, still weird. But I think it's a really nice angle on it. I think that, yeah, I'm digging it. I really like what they're doing with Bullseye here, and I've seen some of the promos, so I know where they're headed, and I'm excited.
Yeah, I think he fits stylistically in really well, which is also half the battle too, because Bullseye could easily just as be a flamboyant and out there type of character too, and that would clearly be out of place here. So they're leaning into the right kind of tone for him, and I think maybe the kicker is that they understand, the showrunners understand that Bullseye is popular and has some real estate, but it's not necessarily prime real estate. So if you put him in a season where the Kingpin is obviously going to be a pillar holding up the roof, then that he's doing that. So then it gives Bullseye room to play on the porch, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like he's not, I think partially what makes Bullseye a little bit stronger than I anticipated him to be in this season is because he doesn't have to carry it. He's just got to be believable enough within the tone and take the cues from the folks that are giving him the real estate that he does have, and just play with that and let Cox and D'Onofrio carry the rest.
And that's the thing with Bullseye, is some characters are better as henchmen. And some characters just really shine when they don't have to carry the narrative weight. And to our fans that are going to probably come at me about the Bullseye thing, don't do it unless you can tell me what your other favorite Bullseye moment is, other than that picture of him stabbing Elektra. Find me a second favorite Bullseye moment and then talk to me.
So overall grade, Daredevil season 3, first 6 episodes. Give me a grade.
I'm A+ in it. I think they're knocking it out of the park. I can't, if I were going to nitpick, which I don't want to do, I could, but it'd be me looking for things to give feedback on. And I don't have it in me to do that to something that is just this much fun.
100%. I'm going to give it a good solid A, not quite an A+, but a good solid A. The first episode of the season was just, I am that teacher.
You're Frank Wheeler in this thing with your 93% on my brilliant paper.
Or an 89 just to prove that you didn't get the A. Uh-huh. I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it an A, but I'm sure I'll probably round out giving it an A+ at the end of the season when it blows my mind, because it's going to happen.
Yes.
So rock on. So thanks so much to the Geek Dad Podcast Network for giving us a tidy little home to enjoy our geekery and share it with the world and find a few more listeners. But if you do enjoy our podcast, please do the following things. 1, follow us on Twitter at WatchComicsPod, because we deserve to hear from you as you deserve to hear from us. We believe that reciprocation is the key to creativity. So hit us up. We love to hear from you. And also, give us a rate and a review on iTunes. 1, because it's good form. If you're listening to us, just do it because all the cool kids are doing it, and it's also a nice thing to do, and we like nice people. And 2, it'll help other people find us so that we can continue to share our beloved opinions with the rest of the world. You clearly think it's worthwhile, or you at least think it's worth doing because it's going to make Jake angry. I think either way, we all come out ahead.
I'd agree, yeah.
Yeah, so there's that. We'll hit you up next week with the rest of Daredevil Season 3. Hopefully it is as awesome as the first half was. And we'll see you on the internets.
We'll see you then.
This podcast has been a production of the Geek Dad Podcast Network. If you've enjoyed this content, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/geekdad.